Hi, I'm Sam and welcome back to the Shoogly Stitch. I'm based in central Scotland and this is my sporadic podcast where I talk all things knitting, spinning and fibre craft related. You can find me on Ravelry and on Instagram as @the_Shoogly_Stitch, and I'd love to see you in both those places. So I think to start out today, I'm going to give a little bit of a reintroduction and a small life update just because it's been probably about a year since I've done one of these videos. So a quick reintroduction to me. I'm Sam. I live in central Scotland with my husband and now two dogs, two long-haired Dachshunds, Poppy and Rosie. And this is just my little podcast where I share things related to what I've been working on. Mostly knitting, a little bit of crochet, quite a lot more of spinning in more recent years. And yeah, it's just my way to kind of share what I've been working on with the world. I feel like everyone says this, but it's been a while since I podcasted. It wasn't really a major focus of mine. Within the past year, I've had kind of a lot going on in my personal life. My dad had a liver transplant, which was quite a stressful period of time. I got married, which was fantastic, but again, weddings take a lot to plan. And then earlier this year, we also got a second dog, and she's still a puppy, so puppies are a lot of work. So this is just the first time that I've really kind of felt motivated to sit back down and record again. Crafting has been important to me throughout, but it is a separate thing from actually sitting down and recording and talking about what you've been working on. I find that making videos requires me to have a lot more planning. I personally am not great if I don't sit down and think about what I'm going to say first. Otherwise, you'll just end up hearing a lot of so that's kind of why there's been a break. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and a little bit of why I've been away, but I thought it would be fun to jump back in and talk about what I've been working on lately. This isn't really going to be that connected to anything I'd videoed about previously. If projects come back up that I had been working on prior to stopping, then that's great, and if they don't, oh well. But to start out with, I will talk about something that did take me, that I had talked about quite a lot. And that is what I'm wearing today. So this is the Lucia Pullover, can never decide which, by Sari Nordland. And this pattern is actually one that I tested for her. However, Sari's test knits, or at least when I was testing, I'm not sure if it's still the same way, only required you to have the yoke done as well as one sleeve. So I finished like where you join the body and finish my one sleeve, and then that was me, and then I kind of chipped away at it a little by little after that. And then so I think I tested and had the test done by February of 2023, and then as it came closer to being a year since I'd actually started working on the project, I decided that I wanted to have it done. So I did finish this sweater earlier this year in I think January or February of 2024. I am super happy with how it turned out. It is quite an involved knit in the sense that there's a lot of twisted stitches, there's lace, it's even on the off rows, the easy rows, you still need to be paying attention because it is still twisted stitches. Even if you're not cabling, all of the knit stitches are twisted, I believe. So there's just a lot to pay attention to, even compared to like a typical cabled pattern. So I really needed to be in the mind space to focus on something. If I hadn't been working on other kind of long-term complex projects over the past year, so especially in 2023, I was working on a Shetland lace shawl for my sister-in-law, and that was kind of taking the brain space I had for complex projects. So this kind of got put on the back burner. So it might have got done quicker if it hadn't been for that. But I really wanted to get it done before a year was up, so I was able to achieve that. I'm really happy with how it turned out. This is in Filcolana Peruvian in color very light gray, and I went up one needle size to get gauge. So I used 3.75 for ribbing and 4.5 for the body. And I also cropped it a little bit so it wouldn't be quite as long as Sari had written it for. And I really like the finished result of that. I also didn't do a double folded collar just because I felt like it looked really chunky in this weight of yarn, and I didn't feel like it would match up with all the rest like nothing else is double folded. The cuffs aren't, the hems aren't. So I feel like when you do double folded neckbands, it can look a little bit too chunky for my taste. So all I did was a tubular bind off instead, and I'm quite happy with that. In hindsight, I maybe could have knit it a little bit longer just because it kind of stretches out a little bit with time, but I'm not really bothered enough by it that I'm going to go back and change things. This is actually the first project as well that I've knit in this kind of oversized fit. So you can see the sleeves have quite a lot of space here. There's quite a lot of positive ease. You can see like my body's here. So there's quite a lot of ease on both sides. I would need to go back and measure to see. But yeah, significant amount of positive ease. But I am actually very happy with that fit, and I'm actively thinking about what my next project is going to be that has that kind of fit. I feel like I'm kind of behind the trend of getting on that oversized sweater fit, and I do think sometimes there can be too oversized, but this is just like comfy. I still feel like put together because it is such a patterned knit that I don't feel like it looks sloppy, and it still looks kind of intentional, but it's just as comfortable as putting a sweatshirt on. So yeah, that is my thoughts on the Lucia. Super happy with it. I definitely will do more sari patterns in the future. I don't know when, but eventually, maybe once I work through some of my stash and have a sweater quantity that is suitable for another sari pattern. But they are just really beautiful and also really well written. I had no issues understanding it, even though it was like in the test version of the pattern. So yeah, super easy to understand, super well written, really gorgeous result. And I haven't had anyone ask if I made it, but I like to think that that's because it looks so complex that it doesn't look like I made it. So that was what I'm wearing, and then I'll go into a few finished objects. And obviously, since it's been a year since I last spoke to you all, I would have a ton of finished objects, but I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I've completed recently. So the first couple things are these Roddin Mitts. Let me just put them on so I can show you. These are knit. There we go. So it's a really lovely ribbed fingerless mitt pattern. And I actually made these with yarn that I had left over from my grow hat. So this is the grow hat that I'm sure I talked about on the podcast last year. Super happy with it. I did go back and lengthen the grow hat since I last recorded, just because it was a little bit short for my liking and because I had enough yarn to go back and do that. So I just ripped back to before the decreases and added maybe about an inch or so. And now it's a lot more wearable, and I've been wearing this constantly, especially while out walking the dogs. But yeah, this is made from my hand spun yarn, which I made from a bat that I got from the Scottish Wool Producers Showcase, and it was a bat from Lunan Bay Cashmere, and they have cashmere goats that they raised over near Lunan Bay in Scotland. And so yeah, this was a bat that I got from them. It is 90% Shetland and 10% cashmere, but I do think you can tell that the cashmere is in there, especially as I've been wearing this and as they kind of have fluffed up. I think it's the cashmere that is fluffing out. So that's been quite interesting. But they are really fairly soft as far as a rustic wool goes, if that makes sense. Like, it is still obviously a wool, but there's definitely a softness to it that comes from both the Shetland and the cashmere. So yeah, I had just about enough hand spun left, and I knew I wanted to make some fingerless mitts because I had been walking the dogs, having cold hands, but I still wanted my fingers free so that I could kind of get treats out of my pockets or like poo bags or whatever, just have some freedom and the dexterity that you don't have when you're wearing actual mittens or gloves. And I already had this pattern in my library because it's part of Isolde's Knitworthy collection that she releases every year. So that's a collection of, I think, like 6 projects that are meant to be good for gifting. And I have tested, I think, a couple years, not this year, but the previous couple years, I think I had tested different patterns for that. And so as part of that, when you test one pattern, you get the rest of the Knitworthy collection, and this was in, I think, last year's Knitworthy collection. So instead of going out and buying a new pattern, I just used what I already had in my library, and I'm actually really happy with them. What I really liked was this detail here. So where the increases are, it creates this nice diagonal line across the palm. So I really like the look of that already. And then the other thing I like about these is that they're designed to be quite long. So you can see it basically goes to the top of my pinky, but then you can fold them down and they're still a reasonable length to keep your hands warm, but you have a lot more freedom. So I quite often wear them in this way. So it's a pretty straightforward fingerless mitt pattern. You start from the bottom, go to the top. The cuff is 1x1 rib, and then it goes into this 2x2 rib with this kind of increased detail. And you can obviously knit it as long as you want. I think I maybe knit it a little bit longer, just because I really wanted to keep my hands cozy. I did end up having to use a little bit of an accent color, and that is in Retrosaria Brusca, just because I did finally run out of the hand spun. But the brown, it, like, looks intentional, I think. It's a close enough color that I'm not really that bothered, and I think it does look nice. I had to go down a couple needle sizes from what was called for, so the pattern calls for a 3 and 3.5 millimeter needles, and I went down to 2.5 and 3 millimeter needles, as well as knitting the smallest size, which was unexpected because I have quite large hands for a woman. If I buy commercially knit gloves, they rarely fit me just because my fingers are quite long. So I wasn't really expecting to have to go down to a smaller size. So I'm not really sure what the story was there, if I was just having significant gauge issues or if the yarn I was using was different from the yarn that the pattern was written in. But in the end, I'm quite happy with the result, and I like that now I have kind of it looks like a set. Even though it's two different patterns, using the same yarn is nice, and now it looks like a set. So I've been using these a lot this kind of autumn already. In hindsight, I probably actually wouldn't do them quite this long because they do start to get in my way a little bit when they're all the way unrolled. So I probably could have just stopped before changing into the accent color, but it's fine. It doesn't make a major difference. And as I said, you can roll them back down as well. So yeah, highly recommend. Isolde's patterns are always really well written, and this is just another great one. The next project I'm going to talk about, I definitely have talked about on the podcast already, and it's another one that took me forever because all my projects take me forever because I tend to work on like 7 to 10 different things at once. But yeah, I finished this back in August finally, and I think I started it in about April of 2023. This is the Funfetti scarf from Max the Knitter, and it is a fairly straightforward pattern. I would say it's actually kind of similar to the Sophie scarf in construction. You start at one point and increase all the way up till it gets to its biggest width, and then decrease back down, decrease all the way to the other point. It has an I-cord edging that's worked at the same time, and then all the little colorful squares and rectangles are worked as intarsia. So you can see here quite a lot of intarsia, but the pattern itself is really quite straightforward. So for that reason, I think it's a great pattern for an introduction to intarsia. It's not like difficult shapes. Squares and rectangles are really quite straightforward to do in intarsia. Here you can see the back side. So pretty straightforward as far as making it look neat and tidy. You don't have any kind of weird shapes that make it a little bit trickier. I knit this primarily in Easdale by Islair Yarn, who's a local Scottish dyer, and the gray yarn is a alpaca, cashmere, and silk, so you can just see in the drape of it, like, it's incredibly drapey and it's incredibly soft. And then the accent colors are by, I think it was a sock pack actually, from the Little Gray Girl. It was several mini skeins in all these colors, which I held double because this is a DK and the colors are 4-plies, and it's a yak sock, so that kind of gives it that rich coloring. And I didn't end up using it for socks because for some reason I bought like a self-striping sock yarn from the same dyer that was in rainbow self-striping, so like what am I gonna do with a self-striping sock yarn and also a mini pack of rainbow yarns, effectively creating the same socks twice. Not sure why I did that, but it worked out really well for this pattern in the end, and I'm really happy with it. My only thing is that I would definitely recommend weaving in the ends as you go, which I mostly did, because otherwise you can imagine for each of these intarsia squares, I'm kind of assuming that you know how intarsia works roughly, but if you don't, you knit across and then you drop your working yarn, pick up the red yarn in this example, knit across that bit, and then you join a new ball of gray yarn and work across. So you've got one tail there for the gray yarn, one tail there for the red yarn, and then when you finish, you've got another tail for the red yarn, and then you cut the gray yarn that you've been working with. So you've basically got 4 tails for each square. So if you don't sew that in as you're going, it would be actually horrific at the end. So the next pattern, moving on to works in progress. Like I said, I've been working on a lot of stuff over the last year. I have multiple works in progress on the go at any time. If you want to take a look, just check out my Ravelry. It's relatively up to date. I'm only going to talk about a couple of them today just so I don't bore you to death and make this last 2 hours. And this is what I've kind of actively been working on quite a lot at the moment. So this is another sweater. This is the Anyday Sweatshirt. And another Isolde pattern actually. I really do like her patterns. I just think they're really well written. They're very size inclusive. They're really thoughtfully written. She really thinks about how they're going to fit multiple different sizes. So yes. So this is the Anyday Sweatshirt, and I'm very close to being done. As you can see, I've got one sleeve complete, as well as the body, and then I've just picked up and started on the other sleeve. You can see there's a nice little detail here on the front that really gives it that sweatshirt vibe. So I think that's really nice. This is knit in Madeline Tosh DK in Fur Wreath. And this is yarn that has already been through at least 2 sweaters. I first got it, I think, when I was in undergrad in I don't know, 2016 or something. So it's bordering on 9-10 years old at this point, but it was a gift from my grandma. I picked it out. We had gone on like a yarn shop tour of Portland, which is where she was living at the time and where she lived for all the way through my childhood. So that was really fun. So I got to pick it out with her coming along. She was one person who kind of helped teach me to knit. So yeah, that was a lovely experience. So I didn't want to just make it into something that I wasn't going to wear. I really wanted the yarn that I'd picked out and that memory to be made into something that I was definitely going to wear. The first project I'd made, I can't remember, I think it was maybe a Hohi Locatelli pattern, and it just didn't fit quite right. It kind of like squeezed. It's too tight. I tend to have problems. I don't want stuff to be super, super oversized, so sometimes I err on the size of it being too small, which is what happened again when I created Knit the Nurtured pattern by Andrea Mowry. It fit on the body, but the sleeves were too tight, so I wasn't wearing it frequently enough. Or, well, they weren't too tight, it did fit, but I just didn't want them to be as tight as they were. So I finally ripped that all out and steamed the yarn, got it relaxed, and then I made it into this. And I was looking for something that would just show off the kind of lovely color of the yarn. I didn't want to do something too textured that would the yarn would take away from, and this just seemed like a great option. As you can see, it does have that sweatshirt styling. I'm knitting it basically exactly as the pattern calls for, and using the needles called for in the pattern, and I'm knitting size 3. It is a drop shoulder pattern, but the sleeves are written in an interesting way. It's got what she calls a gusset here at the bottom. So you can see, you pick up the sleeves and there's these really rapid decreases for the first like 20 rows. Every other row there's decreases, and then it goes into a more normal gradual decrease. And I'm not 100% sure what the intention behind that is. I think perhaps it makes a closer fitting sleeve and gives you more like room for movement without creating a ton of fabric under your arm. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of making all that up. Anyways, happy with how it's going so far. However, when I've tried it on so far, this collar is too small. It's stretching out quite a lot. I think it's kind of just being dragged down a little bit by the weight. This is not necessarily the lightest sweater. I think this is a superwash DK, so that yarn I feel like can tend to be kind of heavier than other maybe woolen spun yarns. So that just is stretching the collar out a little bit. So I am going to go back and maybe add another 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and hopefully that kind of closes it up a little bit more. So getting really close on that one. If I put some time in and devote some effort to doing that sleeve, I should be able to get it done here pretty quick. The next pattern that I'm working on lately is the Porty Pullover by Gudrun Johnston, and it is a yoke sweater, circular yoke sweater, stranded knitting, Fair Isle style. She's originally from Shetland, lives in the US now, but has a lot of kind of Shetland inspired designs. So that is what this is. As you can see, I've just kind of finished the color work part, and I have split for sleeves, though I'm only about maybe 1.5 inches past that split. So now it is stockinette for the rest of the body all the way down. So that's getting worked on, just basically in times where I don't need to focus. I hadn't done a yoke sweater in quite some time, and I had done a test knit for Gudrun Johnston last year, and this is the pattern that I chose in return for doing that test knit. I am using a mystery cone of Shetland wool. There is a label on the inside that says 100% pure new wool, and the color is Nocturne 589. Don't know, it's quite the big cone. I got it from one of my guild meetings. Someone had brought it in. We have donation tables where you can put stuff on that you don't want or are just looking for a donation for or to sell, etc. So yeah, I got this in the last year at some point. It is definitely oiled, so if you smell it, it smells like spinning oil. So I've been winding off a skein at a time using my Nitty Noddy and washing it in hot water as well as Power Scour, just to get some of that spinning oil off. I don't think I've got it quite all the way, but it's better than it was, and it's making up a really nice fabric if you look there closely. The rest of the colors are in the Border Mill North Coast Tweed 4-ply, which is a lovely 100% Shetland yarn. A little bit softer than the blue. That blue is quite a toothy one, although it may soften as I wash again, I'm not sure. So I'll probably need some kind of layer worn under this at all times, but I mean, I tend to do that anyways with my sweaters. I don't think I'm going to be anywhere near using that entire cone. You saw how big it was, so I'm probably gonna just work through the rest of the sweater, and then when I'm done, I'll probably take that cone back to Guild and let someone else get some use out of it, because I definitely don't need the whole thing. As far as the pattern goes, it was really fun. I haven't done color work, like a color work sweater like this, in a little while. So the yoke moved pretty quickly. It's only 2 colors ever at a time, so that's quite straightforward. I chose the colors kind of based on the inverse of how the pattern is, like what the designer's colors were. So she used a kind of dark rust as her main color, and then had a dark blue where I've used the dark orange, a light blue where I've used light orange. Basically, I swapped the oranges for blues, but kept the same lightness and darkness level. I know there's a term for that. The same value? Don't know. Basically, I swapped the oranges for blues. So instead of the main color being orange with lots of blue accents, I did the main color blue with lots of orange accents. And it seems to be working out pretty well. I think I'm happy with how it's turned out so far. So yeah, that's how that's going. Again, just a lot of stockinette until I get to the bottom, and then it'll be sleeves and collar time. Right, so that is all I have as far as knitting, but I am going to talk a little bit about spinning, because that has definitely got a major presence in my crafting life. So I have a couple recently completed spins. One is this kind of interesting scrappy yarn. I don't know if I love it. It is interesting. And I love the idea behind it. I don't know if you are like this, but I think a lot of kind of crafty people tend to be not wanting to throw anything away. And when I first started learning to spin, and kind of in the back of my mind has been this idea of saving my yarn scraps and trying to make new yarn out of it. I know it can be done, obviously, with like, you have to add more fiber in, so that's what's been done here. And I don't love that the base color ended up being this kind of weird brown, but I am fairly happy with how the scraps went in. What I did for this is I kept all the tails and scraps off of like sewing in different ends to different projects and whatnot. And then I carded them just using my hand cards, which would not do again. It made my hand cards really messy. It didn't really break up the yarns that well, even though I'd cut them fairly kind of short. So I'm looking into different ways to kind of approach this same project. And then I carded them into a bat using lots of different fibers on my drum carder. So I used some nylon fiber just because I had some, even that I'm trying to get rid of that and focus more on non-superwash, non-man-made fibers. But I used some nylon and I used some Gotland because it's a longer wool and it's meant to be, I think, stronger. Using long wools I think is meant to be good for socks because that was the intention here. I think I had about 25 grams of scraps. I used about 25 grams of nylon and maybe 25 grams of the Gotland. And then I had kind of, when you use a drum carder, you end up with kind of scrap fiber, waste fiber that gets stuck on the drum. So I'd saved the stuff that I'd pulled off different bats that I'd made and also put that into here. So it is thoroughly a waste kind of yarn, or at least 50%. And this is what I ended up with. Like I said, not like the most pleased with the color, but it's been an interesting project. I'm gonna attempt again being more mindful about the colors that I end up using in it, and how I end up putting the scrap yarn in there. What I'm gonna try next time is, you know how yarn is made of multiple plies, unplying my little scraps and just putting it in that way instead of carding the full pieces of yarn, because I think that will have a more successful result. So yes, that was one project recently. Another one a little bit before then was a different sock project, and again I was using nylon as the 25% nylon, and then I had lots of different kind of pink colors. So I carded these into a bat as well and spun that up. That one's a 2-ply. It's even enough. I don't think it was the most well blended bat, so there's some thick and thin parts, but you know, for socks, and once you knit stuff up, knitting hides a lot of inconsistencies, so I think it will be perfectly fine. The other thing that I'm working on right now is a combo spin, and that is using 3 different braids, 2 from Teen and Floyd, which I believe are Perendale and Shetland, and then a Hilltop Cloud Merino Cashmere. I picked up the Teen and Floyd braids at the Scottish Yarn Festival last year, and I just really liked the colors. It was kind of not a planned purchase, but they were really long braids. I think they were 200 grams each, so longer than normal, so there should be more than enough to make a sweater. And I've been spinning a roughly between heavy fingering, light sport weight yarn. So how I've been doing the combo is kind of been in 3 different ways. The first thing that I did was split all of the braids into several strips. So I stripped them down, and then I couldn't really decide how I wanted to combine them, so I went about it in a few different ways. And one way was putting them through my drum carder, just one pass to kind of combine them on the carder. So you end up getting this. You can kind of see how there's 3 different colors in there, potentially. And I'll wind my little nest back up. After I put it on through the drum carder, I then kind of stripped it, kind of pre-drafted it, so that's why there's some inconsistencies. You can kind of see here as well, especially there, how there's kind of the dark green, the lighter blue, and the darker blue. So that was 3 different shades of yarn, of the fiber, 3 different braids. And here's another one. They're a little bit floofy as they've been in a bag for a while. And then here is the single that's come from this prep. So that was one way in which I tried to combine it. I wasn't 100% enamored with this. I felt like I wasn't getting the most consistent draft out of this. So I didn't want to do the entire project like that. Also, I didn't have the same amount of the merino cashmere as I did the Shetland and the Perendale. So for the second amount of yarn, I ended up running them through a hand carder. And this is something that I first saw from Rachel of Woolen Spinning. And she actually mentioned someone else that she saw it from, that she learned it from. But yeah, that's where I first learned about it. And it's just, you basically have your hand card like this. And then you have a diz here at the bottom. So the hand card is clamped to a table. You've got a diz here and you're just slowly pulling the fibers through the hand cards a little bit. And it just pre-drafts them, opens them up, makes them a little bit more airy. So instead of having this kind of texture of that you're spinning from and having to draft as you go, you end up with something that is really nice and airy and fluffy, like so. So you can kind of, hopefully, get these closer. You go from it being two really distinct braids of fiber, strips off of braids of fiber, and really quite thick as well, to something that's more thin, airier, and a bit more blended together as well. Not completely blended by any means, but certainly more blended and definitely airier. And the second is just easier to draft from. So though it takes a little bit of time to prepare, it's not the quickest thing pre-drafting all of your fiber through the hand cards like that. There is really something quite satisfying to it. And once you get in the rhythm of it, it goes pretty quick and you end up with a really nice finished product. So that is how I approached the two other bobbins. I've been making a 3-ply. So you can see here, one of the bobbins, I still had the Hilltop Cloud. The darker color is the Hilltop Cloud fiber to use. So here's a few kind of little nests. And then here is the bobbin for that. So you can see it's all just, I feel like the darker color comes through a bit more. And then, as I said, I don't have the same amount of the Hilltop Cloud as I do the other ones. I had half as much. The final bobbin is only using those other two, the Perendale and the Shetland from Tina and Floyd. So here's, again, those nests. And you can see really quite fluffy. And the bobbin. And then here's all three bobbins together. So you can see the lighter one on my right, your left. I was really happy with how the singles turn out. They feel really consistent. And then I have been plying already, just because I had filled my bobbins and I don't have tons and tons of bobbins. So here are my first two skeins, which are dramatically different sizes just because I'm not good at estimating when to stop winding on my Knitty Naughty. But here is what the final product has ended up looking like so far. So I feel like it's kind of ended up being a vaguely seafoam green, kind of. It might read kind of gray in different lights. You definitely get more green and more blue and more purple bits depending on what you're looking at, but from a distance it's just this kind of maybe vaguely bluish gray, greenish bluish seafoamy gray. Don't know, it's definitely greener than my sweater, but on camera I think it's reading quite gray. So I'm really happy with how that's turning out so far. Feels very consistent, really beautiful. I have quite a lot left to spin still, so that's definitely an ongoing project. The last thing I'll talk about is another bat that I've made, and this is me finally working through some of the fleeces. I bought a few fleeces last year around this time from a lady who lives maybe 15 minutes away. She has sheep because she likes to train sheepdogs, basically, and apparently to train sheepdogs, like border collies, you really need sheep for them to run about with, is what she told me. So the wool is just a byproduct. So it's not necessarily sheared in the most friendly way for hand spinning. It wasn't the cleanest. It wasn't too dirty, but you know, there's definitely a bit of VM in it. This is how my bat has turned out. Hopefully you can see. I don't know if you can see any of the VM flecks. That's nice and squishy. And I'm really happy with it. The process I've been going through for this is washing the raw fleece, and then I have been picking the wool. So this is what the wool looks like once it's been picked. I don't have any of the just washed locks with me at this moment. They're just put away at the moment, but you can see it's kind of nice and airy. And this is basically how I would put it on the drum carder. So before picking, it's a lot more clumped together before picking, basically. And when you put it through the drum carder like that, it doesn't, you end up getting neps. Whereas when you kind of pick it like this and make it cloudy, it's a lot easier for it to go through the drum carder. So that is how I've been going about my bats, and I just try and spend a little bit of time on it here and there as and when I've got time. I'll get through it eventually. I may eventually try and figure out how to do some dyeing, because I do have a lot of very natural colored wool, whether that's kind of this cream, or I do have some more and darker brown colors as well. But I would like to experiment a little bit with starting to dye, but that's maybe a ways off in my future. There's only so much room for craft supplies. As far as future plans, I don't have anything majorly concrete, just kind of working on what I've already got going. One thing that is in my mind at the moment is making hats with a lot of the kind of leftovers that I have from various projects. I recently found out that there's a well, I knew about this charity already. It's called Refuigi, which is for refugees who make their way to Glasgow. It's kind of a welcoming charity. Anyways, they create these welcome packs for all of the people that they assist, and in these welcome packs are included many different things that people would find useful coming to a new city with not very much. But one thing that is particularly useful coming to Scotland is cold weather items, including hats and gloves and scarves. So I definitely could make plenty of hats. I don't need to wear 20 plus hats, but I think it might be a nice way to use up a lot of this yarn that I don't 100% know what to do with. So I think that's likely to be in my future coming up here soon. So I think that's all I have to talk about today. Thanks for joining, thanks for listening. It was nice to be back and actually talk about a lot of these projects. Nice to remember that this is a fun thing to do, so hopefully I'll be doing this a little bit more regularly than once a year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye!